So
She'll remember
today
the
I wanted to talk
late.
about a topic I spoke about on Shabbat in Sunnah Shrit, but Marlene said it should be recorded, so we're going to be doing it again for the sake of recording. But obviously it's going to come out differently than it was on Shabbat, so we'll discuss it differently than we did on Shabbat. It's not fair to separate Judaism in general between any major groups and ethnicities and philosophies, but we cannot ignore, out of our desire for peace and love and harmony, we cannot ignore that there are different flavors of Judaism and there are different styles of Judaism, and those don't hurt us. They influence us in different ways. Some more, some less, but they exist. You have to call a spade a spade. Just because a spade is a spade doesn't mean you ignore it, but you have to know that
You
it's
just don't
there.
call it
You
a
have to
shovel.
acknowledge it. There's some For many years, I was in a normal Jewish school setting, in a normal yeshiva, normal day schools, and I would lie if I told you that I had heard of any Sephardic rabbi in my entire Jewish education. Not one. Even the Rambam, who everyone here knows about, wasn't taught about in the schools that I was in. And if he was, it happened much later in my yeshiva career, when I was already in yeshiva. In general, the attitude towards Sephardic Chachamim are twofold. One, the medieval Jewish age was dominated by the Spanish Jews. The Sephardic Jews had many great sages. The
Yes.
Rambam, the Ramban, all the different Chachamim, the Ran, the Rif, so on and so forth. And as the Spanish Inquisition and that golden era ended, the Torah, so to speak, was transferred over to Eastern Europe, and that's where the rest of the sages in history were from. And I'll tell you the truth, if I were to ask anybody around this table, and you have been here in this class for a long time, so you have an advantage, but if you would go to any other table of Jews who are, and not all Jews are familiar with Jewish tradition, but Jews who are learned about Jewish tradition, and ask them for the name of 10 influential Eastern European rabbis of the last 500 years, you would be able to get a nice list. Up until today, meaning including rabbis of today. Baal Shem Tov, Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. It's very easy. These names will roll off of your tongue. But if you ask the same exact number of Spanish and Arabic country Jews, Sephardic Jews, and Sephardic Jews is a very misleading title, because not all Sephardic Jews are from Spain, just like not all Ashkenazi Jews are from Germany. But Ashkenaz is the generic term that is given, and Sfaradim is the generic term that is given. The Yemenites would tell you they're not even part of the Sephardic Jews, but we count them as Sephardic Jews anyways, and it's all part of, yeah.
I was going to say, I'm reading a book called The Weight of Ink, and it's about Portuguese Jews in the 1600s. And they left Portugal, and they went to Amsterdam, where they found a home. Now, for 400 years prior to where I'm reading about the mid-1600s, Jews were not allowed, they were expelled from England. And so the Amsterdam the Jewish community was mostly Portuguese, okay? And they sent a rabbi over to England.
Rabbi Menashe Ben Israel. I have his book
And
for
he
myself
didn't stay
right
very long. He didn't stay
here.
very
He wasn't
long.
allowed to really stay long. He wrote a book in English.
And then his son died. Okay, fine. And he sent another rabbi, a blind rabbi, Mendez, I think was his name. And now this part could be fiction, I'm not certain. He had a female scribe, which was quite unusual because women were not supposed to be taught Torah, etc., etc., etc. But this blind rabbi took this son and daughter in of another family that died, and he kind of raised them, and then the son died, and he was left with the daughter, and she became his scribe. And so they found a Geniza in England with all of this stuff, and this might be fiction,
This
I'm
part
not
I don't
certain.
know about. I'm
Okay,
not
I don't
sure.
know. But now we're going through part where we're going through all the letters, the translations. It really is fascinating.
The Portuguese.
But the Portuguese, they referred to themselves as being the highly educated ones, and they called the Tedesco. I had to look up the word. Tedesco was the word they used for the German, Polish Jews who were the illiterate ones.
Like the peasant Jews.
The Germans were the peasant ones, Tedescos. That was like a slight that you would give.
So it's for this reason when there's like the
So
Ashkenazi elitism towards the Sephardic Jews, I don't call it out so much because there were many eras of our history in which the tables were turned and the Sfaradim were not much better. So I'm just
That was
honest
the point
about
that I'm
That's
making.
the-
That history brings it. It's this way,
It's
that
an
way,
ebb and
this
flow.
way, that way.
Synagogues
It
in
flows.
Amsterdam, the Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam is absolutely
Also in New York, this is accessible to you.
unbelievable. It's just exquisite. And do you know that Rembrandt van Rijn?
Oh, so Rabbi Menashe ben Israel was the study partner of Rembrandt.
Thank you.
They used to philosophize together.
Correct.
Rembrandt painted the only portrait we have of it.
Correct.
This is
Jewish.
I was just going to tell you that.
This is the
Oh,
Israel
right.
guy.
This
Yeah,
rabbi.
yeah, yeah,
This
yeah.
is
Because
Rabbi
I've just
Menashe
been
ben
reading
Israel.
about
But he
him.
wasn't,
Yeah.
but he
and
believed in,
Rembrandt did a portrait of him.
but he believed in Jewish philosophy,
Yes.
and he was amazing.
it
I went
says
to his
here-
house. It's got
doesn't say
many
here
Jewish
Rembrandt,
things in
but
his house.
the one famous portrait we have of him, and essentially he wrote books in English, he wrote books in Latin, books in Spanish, books in Hebrew. This book, look how old it is. I don't think it's been reprinted since. This is his book on the eternal,
Nashmot?
about the soul.
Oh,
Nishmat
Chaim.
Chaim. This is essentially a book
Someone
on
would
how
test
the
my
soul works,
pronunciation.
what levels of souls there are, how the soul comes into the world. And Rabbi Peretz loves the book so much that he has 2 copies of it in his tefillin bag. It has a. This book took me many years. I have two copies of it, and I'm in the market for used books, and they're not around so much. Nobody's bothered to reprint these books. He wrote a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, a code of Jewish law in Portuguese, which I don't even know if you can get it today in Portuguese, but it would be wonderful to translate it over into English or to Hebrew. The book that he wrote in English was essentially for the king and the queen of England to allow the Jews to come back into England. It didn't happen in his lifetime, but it
didn't.
happened afterwards.
Yes.
And they credit that return of the Jews to England because of him opening up this dialogue
That's right.
with the king and the queen
Yes.
of England. That was something very influential.
Well, it was
rabbi.
somebody with Cromwell's
That's
some
right.
successor or something.
Correct.
He actually opened the dialogue with.
Yes.
That's what I read.
So,
But that
So-
is correct.
so
Yeah.
back to where I was sharing, and that is, I was always taught that, like I mentioned, the Rishonim, the early sages, they were Sephardic, and then that transferred over to Ashkenazi Judaism. And the second is, and if the Sfaradim did have rabbis in the last 500 years, they were mystics, they were poets, they were simple believers in Hashem, they were very pure, they were not so intellectual, not so intelligent, not very sophisticated. Definitely they didn't have if you ask me the big names of Jewish philosophy in the 21st century, you'll hear Lubavitch Rebbe, you'll hear Rabbi Soloveitchik, you'll hear Rabbi Kook, and the chief rabbi of Israel. Rav Kook had a counterpart who was a Sephardic chief rabbi, Rav Uziel, who we've studied a lot, but nobody else has studied. Rabbi Massas, we mentioned from Morocco, we mentioned Rabbi Chaim David Halevy, so on and so forth. Rabbis with not just small philosophies, but philosophies that could have changed the face of the Jewish future and were intentionally ignored and erased. And so this conference essentially is to focus back on these rabbis' writings and to show that there was a method, help me with the word, yes, methodological
Methodology.
approach to Jewish philosophy, to communal living, and to understand this, it's important to understand that in every community in which there were rabbis, especially in the Sephardic communities, and I've mentioned to you about this about North Africa, there were chief rabbis, and the chief rabbis function as literally the leaders of the community. There were courts, there were schools, there were yeshivot, there were synagogues, there was a central charity fund. There was nothing independent about those Jewish communities. They function as full-fledged societies. And so when it came to envisioning the future of a Jewish state and the Jewish homeland, all you had to do was take the model that worked for Morocco, take the model that worked for Jerba in Tunisia, take the model that worked for, and you just made it on a much bigger scale, and they already had a plan for what a full-fledged country should operate like. Something that unfortunately, due to terrible anti-Semitism in Europe, rabbis didn't enjoy that. No community operated independently with a court system, with a chief rabbi, with a government. The chief rabbi of Morocco could put somebody in prison if he wanted to. He was considered a government official. The French government gave him the full power to prosecute people. Technically, if he wanted to put people to death.
Jewish.
But so were
Okay.
rabbis in Europe that had that power.
There were times. There were the Vad Ha Baratzot, the 4 countries, but it was not it didn't always last for 2,000 years, and it wasn't, and it depended on the kings and the governors and the places, and you'll find that the Ashkenazi community was that which challenged its rabbis much more. even just the birth of the reform movement. I mean, to tell the rabbis, we don't care about you, we're starting our own movement. That would have never happened in a Sephardic country. There's nobody, and you could argue for the good or the bad of that, because that's what it was. And so a full-fledged philosophy existed there, and we're trying to discover and bring out that philosophy.
There was no innovation within that.
Oh, and part of this attitude of locking yourself up in your own four walls of a ghetto, of a yeshiva, of a community that everybody who's like you is part of you, and those who are not like you can just leave. We don't need you here. What that creates is not just not innovation, but it's a fear of innovation. It's a desire to stay away from anything that comes off as modern, as new, as today when you want to buy a house, has a modern look. That's used as a compliment, like it's a modern house, not an old house. If you would go to the Orthodox community today and say that you have a rabbi, he's so modern, that's almost like saying he's not even a real rabbi. That word is used in a derogatory fashion, modern, which is interesting because why in every other context modern is good, except for when it comes to religion.
It's
You know what I'm saying?
amazing, yeah.
But that's a very Eastern European approach, and you could say that even Western Europe, where those were the Jews who were perhaps more innovative and more, they got the brunt of it from their brethren in Eastern Europe. I mean, that was where the heart of the Reform movement was, but that's also where the heart of Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch was, and Rabbi Hildesheimer and the big tzaddikim that led Western European Jews into universities, education for women, so on and so forth. Rabbinic seminaries, incredible things that happened in the Orthodox community of Western Europe that until today are considered controversial by Eastern European Jews. So innovation was something that was very much frowned upon, and still is. So why did I come to tell you about this? I want to read to you from Rav Uziel, who we've spoken about before. And his approach is to a rabbi, and what a rabbi should do, and what a rabbi, when he approaches halakha, Jewish law, how he should approach Jewish law. We always talk about why Jews run away from Judaism, why Jews leave Judaism, why Jews are not interested in Judaism. We're always trying to make Judaism more relevant, or things like that. And when you make Judaism more relevant, so you have like sushi in Judaism, or beer in Judaism, or rock climbing in Judaism. I would argue, and I'm not against this, but if you like to study Torah while you eat sushi, that's all the power to you. I'm not against that. But it's not making Judaism more relevant. It's simply because people like sushi, so now you have them around the table, and then you teach them non-relevant Torah, but in a setting that they more appreciate than the synagogue. That's all that happened. It's not that the Torah became more relevant, it's that you've doubled it up with something that's more interesting to people. Beer, yeah, Talmud, no. Beer, great, I'll be there. You want to read for me a page of Talmud while I'm drinking my beer? Great. It doesn't make Talmud more relevant. It just makes an incentive for people to say, when he's al-Khanan, if you clean up your toys, I'll get a lollipop. He didn't overnight become mature and clean up his toys. He just wants a lollipop, so he'll do whatever it takes for that lollipop. I wouldn't tell you, he's so grown up that he cleans up his toys on his own. That would be a lie if I told you that. So, when I say more relevant Torah, that's not what I'm referring to. I'll read to you from Rav Uziel, you already understand what we're talking about. Rav Uziel only lived for the first 5 years of the founding of the State of Israel.
Oh, Rabbi, I think what I'm hearing is you're saying that the content of what's being learned doesn't change, and the seriousness and the depth of it does not change, but the venue within which, here we are sitting in your home instead of a synagogue learning.
Right.
Right? We easily could have food around the table if we chose to have breakfast during this class. We could be nibbling while we're discussing. So that seems to be okay, but the content of what we're learning is the depth of what you're saying stays the same.
Correct. Well, I wasn't saying that such in a positive way. What I was saying is, and youth is an incorrect word, but this generation of Jews is, and again, it'd be a few generations that I'm including in this generation, people who are alive today. They come to a synagogue and they hear a speech about the destroying of Amalek, men, women, and children, or they hear about slaves and Jewish law of slaves, or they're going to hear about stoning people to death and Jewish tradition. And if it wasn't for the nice food they had by the Kiddush, I'm not sure your average Jew would stay for that sermon or be involved in that. And you're finding, I'm the last person to tell you that Torah is outdated. God forbid, you're not going to hear those words from me. But what message are we passing off to this generation is that, the Torah, my rabbi, and this is the example I gave in Shabbat. If I ask my rabbi, if I put not kosher food on a ceramic plate for more than 24 hours, can I now have kosher food? He can tell you all the details about ceramic plates and glass cups and metal pots. And if I ask him about Shabbat, how hot can the water be that I put my tea bag in on Shabbat, and when am I allowed to put the sugar before the hot water, after the hot water? He can tell me all those things. Can you carry on Shabbat? Can you drive a car on Shabbat? All those things he can talk to me about. I asked my rabbi to talk to me about economics and Torah, and I'll be met with silence or awkwardness, and I'll ask her to know, is the Torah more socialist or more capitalist? And the rabbi might not know an answer for that. Or I'll ask the rabbi, what does the Torah believe about healthcare for citizens that can't afford it? Because you must believe that as a functional Jewish society, we've had this conversation before. But we'll be mumbling and stumbling and trying to come up with an answer, and we won't know. Or does the Torah believe that citizens of a country are entitled to be supported by a country? Is that true? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Do poor people have to be supported by the government, or is that not a right? That's their problem. What does the Torah have to say about X, about Z, about people go have business?
About life.
They'll wear their kippah, they'll wear their tzitzit, but when it comes to doing business, there's no code of Jewish law for that. As long as I can make money, that's all that matters.
And it doesn't matter if I cheat and steal.
Very good. And
I'm a rabbi.
We've done exactly what Christianity did to Christianity, and that was church and state together was a disaster. So what did we do? We limited church to the church and state to the state. Never should the two mix. We've taken Judaism and said it is only relevant inside of the synagogue. Leave it in the synagogue. The rabbi, don't talk to us about economics, don't talk to us about politics, don't talk to us about, we don't appreciate hearing about that from you. Because come on, what the Torah actually says about Republicans or Democrats, that's just the Torah does not say anything about Republicans or Democrats. The Torah has values, which are Torah values, that have more to do than just what kind of ceramic you can use on Passover, or what kind of kosher symbols you can eat. The Torah has a bigger worldview than that. And so long as we force the Torah into the synagogue, you're going to get a very limited... And so what does a high school student or a college student get? My rabbi knows how to teach me Chumash, but he doesn't know how to teach me what my professor in university can teach me. He doesn't know how to open up my mind about other topics. He doesn't have that ability, and they're probably right. Because we've even accepted that role as rabbis, that we don't get involved in bigger things than apply to the synagogue. We'll give a kosher symbol to a restaurant based on which companies they buy their chicken from, but not on how they pay their employees, or how they treat their customers, or if the restaurant is handicap accessible. That's not part of the kosher conversation.
But the rabbi could talk about the teachings of like Rabbi Uziel, Rabbi Messas, all of that.
The question is, do they?
And as a result of that, you're learning values and morals and everything else, which, if the thinking mind would then apply to making a decision out in when they vote or politics or.
Absolutely, that's what I'm trying to share. The Torah is relevant to more than just the chairs inside of the synagogue.
Thank you.
And we have to not be. It doesn't mean that everyone not everyone listens to me about kosher either, right? But to have that information, to have the knowledge in my head when I'm now approaching an issue, what did I learn about that the Torah actually feels about this topic, about that topic, about this issue? These are real issues. I've given a class here before, twice already, not in the Monday group. What Torah feels about prison. Do we believe in a prison sentence? Is prison a Jewish concept? The Torah doesn't have prisons in it.
No.
So if the Torah doesn't have prisons, they have two questions to ask. Why not? Why would you not put someone in prison? And two, what is the alternative? What is the Torah alternative to punishing a criminal if it doesn't include prison? You put everyone to death? No. So what's the alternative?
But in the Chumash Saturday, I read that they had 3 safe cities that Moses spoke about.
What are safe cities?
Well, they were. I was going to ask you about that. It sounded, as I was reading it, that if somebody killed someone and it was not a war-related death, right, that they could just retreat to that sanctuary city, and no one could touch them there. You couldn't.
So this isn't my conversation for today, but if you go to YouTube, I have 2 classes on this topic: prisons.
Question: is it 3 or 7?
Depends where in the land of Israel. Outside the land of Israel, there are more than 3 later on in our period, but 3 or she's right.
Yeah.
What we have here is an interesting concept, and I'll just present you in one foot what I mean. A man commits a crime. Yeah, whatever crime it is. short of murder and rape and things that you could argue is a danger for society. I'm talking about a crime that's punishable, meaning it's a bad thing that they did and needs to have a consequence. It can't just be a slap on the wrist. But now you take away this person from his family. You put him in a prison. So what happens now? This person is no longer working. Are they actually helping? Let's say they stole from somebody. They stole $50,000 from a person. Are they paying back their debt from the
No.
person they stole from?
No.
Who's paying for them to be in prison?
We are.
We are. Who are they meeting while they're in prison?
Other prisoners who've
Other
done the
criminals.
same. Yeah.
When they leave prison and are now out of society for 10 years, what are the chances of them integrating back into society?
Slim.
Very
Slim vanilla.
They've been out of technology for 10 years, out of the news for 10 years, out of it. Their friends no longer want to be their friends. They have a record. They come back after 10 years,
As what's
and
the
then
answer?
and
Not
then
to send them?
and then they go back into prison because they don't last very long out on the street, and they just do what they did before. And now they have friends. I mean, before he was just a lone criminal. Now he has a whole network of buddies he graduated prison with. And then we put them back in prison, and now that's just him. So the person who was a victim, nothing happened to them. They didn't get repaired. They didn't get money back.
No.
They didn't get rehab. This person didn't get rehabilitated. They just got penalized, and it's a penal system. That is part of the system here. There then is what about his wife? So his wife married a criminal, but now for 10 years she doesn't have a husband. And you can argue, well, who wants to live with a criminal? But you'd be surprised. My husband stole while he was the CEO of a company. I'm not going to divorce him over that. I mean, he did something wrong, but it's not everything is a grounds for a divorce. She'll live with a guy who stole $100,000. Don't judge her here.
She enjoyed the
She has a
money.
husband. She has children. Now she no longer has a husband, so she goes into the status of a single mother, and she's raising, let's make it 5 children. 5 children are growing up without a father. So now what happens? Essentially, at a certain point in time, these children are going to grow up in a world where now they're going to either want to be like their father or have nothing to do with their father. They're going to end up in some kind of social welfare program that's from the government, and some social workers are going to have to visit their house. They're going to be dependent on other people. They might never become an American. So there are many problems that are being caused. None of the problems have actually been fixed, aside from one. We've managed to penalize this person. Yes, we did accomplish that. And 2, we've managed to literally take away 10 years of a person's life without anything productive happening from it. And the Torah views this whole thing as one big destruction of many areas of society. And the worst of them being when he comes out back into society is that this person is not fit to be in society anymore. And so Torah has an alternative. Not all criminals, not all, because some criminals need to be penalized. But some criminals are not safe to live among society anymore. They killed a person. It wasn't on purpose, it wasn't intentional, but they're not the type of person I'm willing to let live next door to my daughter-in-law. That's not happening. But I also can't take this person away from his family, and I can't kill him because he didn't intend to kill somebody. So I literally build cities of other people like him, where he lives with his wife, he lives with his kids, there's Jewish schools, there's a synagogue. The whole question of should a criminal be allowed into a synagogue? The truth is, I don't know if all criminals should. I know he needs a place to pray, but why should my synagogue need to? So there's a synagogue for criminals.
Israel actually has this now?
No,
Yes,
it doesn't. No, it
no.
doesn't exist in Israel today. No.
Well, hang on. Among the Haredi, they do.
No,
because look at all those guys
don't take
that
me
they
here. I'm
kept
talking about the Torah here. I'm talking about the Torah. And the ideal is, what about that whole problem with making friends with other criminals? So who lives in these cities?
Other
All
criminals.
the criminals.
Who else?
And the
Well,
family.
their families.
Who else?
The
Okay.
rabbis.
Which rabbis?
There is
The tribe of Levi, who are the rabbis of the Jewish people, are not allowed to inherit land in Israel. They cannot
so
buy
they
property.
live in
They live in Arei Miklat. Imagine a person who's a criminal. Now he has to live between 3 different rabbis. His next door neighbor to the right, his next door neighbor to the left, his neighbor behind
Or
him.
Levi's.
And they're all Levim. They're all teaching in the schools. They're all running the. This is like intense therapy. This is being thrown into the lion's den of morals and religiosity when that's the last thing they ever wanted to
What's to
accomplish.
stop them from getting in the car or getting on their camel and leaving?
They can't leave because remember the people outside the city just want to kill them.
That's right.
They can't leave the
Do
city.
they have
They're
a
not
mark
safe.
upon them that identifies them?
The people who are waiting to seek revenge literally are
There we go.
camping out around the city. They're waiting.
Absolutely, they're waiting.
This is a city that is meant to rehabilitate. It's meant to take a person out of society while not divorcing him from society and not removing his family structure, not collapsing his family structure. Our rabbis viewed this. It's not perfect. There are problems with the system also. But in our rabbis' eyes, this does less damage than throwing a person in prison for 20 years. And I have a class about this. We could talk about not all crimes end up in such a nice situation as this
No.
communal setting. This is for a very unique type of crime. Other crimes, we mentioned there's slavery that's included in there. What is the point of slavery? Is not like you think you're gonna chain people to a wall. A slave has a house, he has a family, he has kids, he has his own property. He's living in the same life he lived beforehand, but he works for years without getting paid. Why? Because let's say that Moshe stole from Reuben, and now Reuben, he's out $50,000. By putting Moshe in prison, Reuben's not getting his money back. So you make Moshe work for Reuben. Now Reuben might opt out, like I don't want that criminal working in my business. But more often than not, it might be good for your business to have a white-collar criminal on staff. You know, this is the kind of guy who can make you money, right? No, so in some situations what would happen is Moshe would work for Shimon, and Shimon would pay Reuven the proceeds. Meaning it would be, if he didn't want to take in the criminal that stole from him, that's okay. But what you're doing now is you're repairing a relationship between two people who had a strained relationship. You're giving him something to do with his life. He's not sitting in prison. He's working every day from 9 to 5. He doesn't make money back. But how does he feed his family? That can't fall on the government. That's Shimon's job to pay for him. Reuven's job to pay for Moshe. He pays his rent, he pays his utilities, he pays his food, and he subtracts it from the amount of money that he owes him. So it'll take a few more years because you make me $30,000 a year, but I spend $15,000. So you really only make $15,000 a year. Okay. And then that takes a few years to get paid back. What happens after 5 years? After 5 years, this guy's been working for me diligently. I now got an employee. At this point, I might actually hire the guy. Because he's worked in my business for 5 years. He knows how to do this. He's made money for me. And now what I tell him, listen, I'm not going to pay your bills, but I'll pay you your salary. And now, not only did I just fix a relationship, I rehabilitated someone, I didn't destroy the family unit, and everything got solved here.
Yeah, but that's only for financial crimes. You can't do it for murder and rape.
And that's what I mentioned in the beginning.
Exactly.
But how many people are in prison for financial crimes?
Only white-collared people.
Okay, I don't know that only white-collar people.
I think that majority of them are white-collared.
Robbing a bank. That's
Well, you then would come into a Torah discussion about, non-violent crimes in general. Do we believe that prison is the answer? More often than not, prison is not the answer in Jewish law. And it's not because we're naive and think that, people shouldn't be separated from society, but we're trying to penalize a person while rehabilitating a person and not causing unnecessary damage to their families and not causing unnecessary burden to society by having to support the people who are in prison. That's a ridiculous concept. Why should I pay for something? It's like a zoo, but you can't even go visit. Like it's a bunch of people in cages. And the crimes that go on in prison? I'm in the middle of watching a documentary about prison life.
Oh, it's
Unbelievable
horrendous.
what happens in prisons. If you think that's good for any human being, it's a disaster. A disaster what happens there. It's not a safe space for criminals to be.
No, it isn't.
And we all know this, and we don't care to do anything about it.
Because society hasn't come up with an acceptable alternative that anyone can agree on. The best they can come up with is just get them over there and lock the door.
Throw away the
Even
key.
if that's what society agrees. So get them in, lock the door, but why should anybody live like that? And overcrowding of prisons, that's not the only problem. Crimes in prison, checks and balance system in a prison.
There's rape in prison
Rape.
too.
Rape. The statistics are that almost nobody doesn't get raped in prison.
Who made this documentary?
The number of, it's not one, it's a number of different documentaries. I've been researching this stuff since I gave my class. People have been upset, so I've been researching prison, and the more I research what goes on, and this is in America. You have to imagine there are countries out there that are not even near what we have here in our country. I mean, they're worse by miles.
You don't want to be in jail in Morocco.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And you don't want to be
in
in
Russia,
Turkey.
in South America. Right?
Even in Mexico.
The best place to be in jail is Monte Carlo.
Really? Why?
The jail overlooks the ocean.
Air conditioning?
Only if you have an ocean view.
Everybody has.
Everyone has an ocean view.
Yeah.
But think just in
Is
this
that white
country,
collar crime?
you can have a high schooler commit a crime, a non-violent crime. I'm not talking here about rape or murder. Please understand very carefully. He sold drugs. Why? He was 14. His parents are both in prison, and he's fending for himself on the streets, and some guy adopted him on the street and gave him a pouch of drugs to sell. And he makes a cut. That's how he eats and drinks. We take this kid. He's able in this country to be put in prison until he's 60 years old.
Yes.
For something he did when he was 15.
It's true.
No,
So my
no,
nephew-
you can only, if you're
A
a
juvenile?
minor, you can only be put in prison till you're 21.
That's not accurate. Because
No,
you
it's
can
not
be tried as
accurate.
an adult, depending which
Oh,
age you're
okay.
Correct.
That's
So
the
my
age and the crime.
nephew, when he was 22, I won't tell you the details, but bottom line, it was a drug-related thing. My older sister's son, and he was sentenced to 25 years in jail in Tennessee. So this was the shanda, you can imagine,
Of the family. Right.
So what everyone kind of said to him was the following. Now he could have gone to Canada. That was an option, but he said, no, I did it. I'm going to go to jail. And everybody, my mother, his grandmother at the time, we all said, okay, look, you messed up. This is the sentence. You only have one possibility now. Remember where you came from, who you are, what you were taught, all your values and everything else, and no matter what goes on in those four walls where you are, you operate out of where you came from, the values you were taught, and everything else. And he got out in 3.5 years.
Really?
It's like, hello. Do you know what I'm saying? He got caught trafficking. Got caught in Tennessee running drugs from New York to probably to California.
But this concept of
25
taking
years
a
in
human
Tennessee.
being, because even a bad human being can serve society in some way.
3.5 years. He was out on probation. Probation was another 5 years, but he had a 25-year sentence. I mean, yeah.
Think about 3.5 years. It's being locked in a cage and taken out of a cage, and locked in a cage and taken out of a cage. It's not a. No, listen, you could tell me that society is not ideal, so this is the non-ideal situation in which we deal with criminals. But the Torah is trying to build an ideal society. And in the ideal society, it doesn't make sense for us. Even a criminal is alive. Even a criminal has potential. At the very least, harness that potential for the sake of the government. There are famous criminals who've gone down into prison and they've served at the FBI and they've served in the CIA.
Correct.
At least you're giving purpose to... you find this with in the Torah. Yosef gets thrown in prison. All of a sudden you find him interpreting dreams for people in prison. He finds himself what to do in prison because how can he just live in a prison cell? Well, that's a life. That's what I'm meant to do.
Some people get degrees in prison.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
this,
I mean, he listened. This kid listened, to his credit. Mitch listened, and he was a model person. I mean, everyone was like, oh my God, is this the same kid? Model person. But it took that to get into his head.
So what I was coming from here to say was, when you're teaching, especially youth, you're teaching Torah, how much can you hear already about mezuzahs and about tefillin and about prayer and about... You also want to hear about issues that I argue about on the news and issues that I write about on blogs and then CNN and the channel, whatever I'm fighting about or wherever I'm arguing. Why doesn't the Torah have what to say also? In the first years of the State of Israel, and I believe it was the only chief rabbi ever, Rabbi Uziel had a seat in the Knesset. He was a chief rabbi, so he was not a politician. He was not voting in the Knesset. But just like in Israel, when you want to pass a law, there's a, what do they call it, Salam Mishpatim? There's a guy who, when you want to pass a law, it's an attorney general, it has to go through him first for him to tell you, this is a legal law this might be an illegal law you're trying to pass. We can't pass this law. It goes against democracy. It goes against the Israeli Bill of Rights. So there was a chief rabbi spot also in the Knesset, which was the chief rabbi was asked to review any law that was going to pass through Knesset, and he would offer his notes or an alternative or a rebuttal or an agreement with this law, and nobody had to listen to it. But it was inconceivable for the early Knesset members to pass a law in the State of Israel without having any kind of rabbinic insight into it. They didn't listen to him most of the time, but it was there. His notes were on record that he recommended that this law be altered in this direction. Sometimes they did listen to him. When he passed away in 1953, this position passed away with him.
But his notes remained?
We have some of his...
That would be very interesting to see.
We have his protocols in Knesset. We have even Rabbi Yosef was asked sometimes to come into Knesset, although those were already less state matters and more religious matters the state was ruling on. And we have protocols that he suggested and laws that he suggested. There's what to be taught in Judaism, and there were sages that dealt with these issues. There were. And it perhaps would make the Torah relevant to some people to be able to hear these things and to know these things, to know, hey, we're not at some ship that's sailing without a captain, but there's what to be said for our faith and our Torah. So I want to read to you what he writes here. He was coming to issue halachic ruling. Someone came to ask the rabbi a question. Is what do most rabbis do? Wait a second, I'll look it up in a book. And they go take out a book. Oh, the Code of Jewish Law says do this or don't do that. Listen to what he says, Rabbi Uziel. 1940s, maybe earlier. HaShofet, the judge, or HaPosek HaTalmudi, or the Talmudic rabbi. Eno yachol, ve'eno rishai, he's not allowed and he's not permitted. Lomar le'atzmo l'sho'alav, to tell himself or those who come to ask him questions. Neiti sefer, let's take down a book from the shelf. V'nechazeh, we'll see what it says inside of that book. Ve'efsok kehalacha min hamuchan kechol ha'katuv b'sefer. Whatever it says in the book, that's what we're going to do. It's forbidden for a rabbi to say such a thing. Lo zohi darkam shel baalei hora'ah. This is not the way of the rabbis who render halachic rulings. אלא חובתם היא זו לעיין במקורה של הלכה, לברה ולבנה ולצרפה ולזככה לפי ידיעותיו המקיפות. He has to take it down and to analyze them on his own in an original fashion, to interpret them anew. What is his source for this? There's a Talmudic teaching from the Sifrei. It says the following. Amar le Rabbi Yaakov bar Chanina le Rabbi. Rabbi Yaakov, the son of Chanina, tells Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Who's Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi?
Head of the...
He's the author of the Mishnah. He wrote the Mishnah. He says, Bo unefashpesh b'halachot. Let us come and turn over the halachot. Let's reread Jewish law. Bishvil shelo ya'alu chaludav. In order so they don't become rusty. Let's reassess Jewish law so that it doesn't become rusty. That's the kind of saying that you'd ask, who said that today? The Reform rabbi said that. This is something that the Talmud says. You can't let halakha just sit there and get old. It'll become rusty, and rust breaks. That's not a healthy halachic system to not reevaluate halachic teachings. So on which basis do you reevaluate halachic teachings? What changes do you take into consideration when you deal with halakha? Listen to what he writes. T'na'ei ha'chaim.
Actualia.
What's Tanei HaChaim?
What's happening?
Life conditions, people's situations, the status of life. That this generation, we're dealing with different issues than previous generations did.
Correct.
Today, people might be a little better off. You're dealing with one person, and they ask you a question, and another person asks you the same question, but they're both in two different financial places, they're both in two different spiritual places, or they're in two different kinds of marriages, or two different kinds of children they're asking about. You can answer the same question two different ways depending on the person and their circumstances in which they're living. There's no book can do that, says Rabbi
Today it's Google.
Let's check Google's.
Shinuyei ha'arachim. This is something you would never consider from a primitive Sephardic rabbi who says the changes in society, values of society. We don't believe in the same things we always believed in. There are things that have shifted in society, values that have shifted in society. It doesn't mean the Torah changes. It means that the approach of the Torah may be a little bit different depending on what we're in and who we're at. You have a world in which somebody who wasn't married wasn't considered even a human being, especially if they were a woman. Not so long ago, my friend. The person was a woman and she wasn't married. She's not even. It's like she doesn't become a human being until she becomes married. Today, you live in a world of, what do you mean? Marriage is not a prerequisite for doing anything in life. I don't have to get married to have a job. I don't have to be married to go to university. And to still look at halakha in the same way. You might remember when we did this. Remember Rabbi Uziel and voting?
Yes.
We had this conversation.
Yes.
Rav Kook says, what do you mean a woman is going to go and vote on her own? And Rav Uziel says, what do you mean she's not going to? You live in a world where women do all kinds of things on their own. So, yeah, but it used to be in the olden days. Rav Uziel says, but olden days are the olden days. Today, you're not dealing with the same type of people.
No, even in the Torah, the story of Bnot Tzlofachat, it's also something.
Very good. The daughter of Tzlofachat coming to Moshe and saying, listen, we want to inherit land. And Moshe says, I don't know. I've never had this question asked before. And he reassesses the situation.
I think that's your core pet peeve with the ultra-religious communities, where they only have one answer, right, regardless of
who the person is who's asking.
Correct.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, and what Paulette mentioned is something interesting. Remember I told you at the beginning of rabbis who had functional societies? There were the chief rabbis, there were courts. In Europe, most of the time, a rabbi was prestigious rabbis. I'm not talking about your simple folk rabbis. Your prestigious rabbis were the rabbis of yeshivot, of rabbinic academies. They were the rabbis on rabbinic courts. They were the rabbis who wrote intense works. The books that come out of Eastern Europe are perhaps the most sophisticated intellectual works that we have in the whole Jewish literature canon. The whole unbelievable minds. But you find one common denominator among them, and that is I'm the Rebbe of the Vizhnitz Hasidim. When I make a legal decision, I don't care about anybody else. I only care about my Hasidim. I'm the Rosh Yeshiva of this yeshiva in New York. I don't care what the guy in Flatbush is struggling with. I don't live in Flatbush. I only care about the people who are in my yeshiva.
That's the problem.
But it's also a luxury. What it means is everybody in my yeshiva, the only struggle they have in life is which chapter of Tehillim do I read today? You know, they're not dealing with work. They're not dealing with kids. They're not dealing with criminals. They're not dealing with life, with issues with the plumbing blowing up in their house. They're all a pretty unanimous, homogenous group of people. It's very easy to be a rabbi for that kind of population. The community rabbis, and this is also in Europe, the community rabbis didn't have this luxury. They have to deal with everybody, from wealthy people to poor people, from educated people to not so educated people, from people on a higher social status and people on a lower social status, people who are more religious and less religious, more spiritual and less spiritual, more involved, less involved. And when they issued Jewish teachings, they had to take everybody into consideration. What I'm finding the common denominator here is those rabbis that did not deal with the whole Jewish people, like you mentioned, they only have one answer, because this answer works for my community. I don't care if it doesn't work for you. I don't need to care about you. You can't consider yourself a Jewish leader. You could be the leader of a Jewish community, but you're not a leader of the Jewish people if all you care about is yourself. You know, and we mentioned them before, the Lubavitch Rebbe, in a number of different contexts. And you know, for me, the Lubavitch Rebbe, and I know other people don't see it this way, but it was a little bit of an extreme leader for me. The one thing you cannot take away from the Lubavitch Rebbe is he didn't just view himself as the rabbi of his Hasidic movement. He viewed himself as a rabbi of perhaps the whole Jewish people. Now, if the Jewish people felt that way, is a different story. But when he was issuing teachings and he was speaking, and the Lubavitch Rebbe spoke in Yiddish in his synagogue, but there were headsets for people who didn't speak Yiddish. I don't know if you've ever seen the videos of earphones for people who spoke English. I mean, I was at a speech now in Jerusalem. So I was there's a rabbi, the Hasidic Rebbe, coming to speak. Why don't you come listen? I said, he's going to speak in Yiddish or he's going to speak in Hebrew? No, he's American. He'll probably speak in English. So I came. And for an hour and a half, I'm stuck in a room with the rabbi who's speaking in Yiddish. But I don't understand Yiddish. I don't know what a word he's saying. I don't know what he said. And he quoted some things in Hebrew, so that I understood. But aside from that, I didn't understand. The Lubavitch Rebbe had the foresight to know that not only my Hasidim are going to come listen to my speeches, and therefore it has to be accessible for other people also. And that's something to be said for him. And so he could have considered himself a Jewish leader because he led not just his own population. And I mentioned Lubavitch Rebbe specifically because I'm not a student of Lubavitch Rebbe, and I see this greatness on him of looking out for more than just his own kind. Rav Uziel is saying you have a sage, a Jewish sage, has to operate this way. Tegliot technika v'amada. You can help me this, not in Hebrew. Technika, what is technika?
Techniques.
So today we would use technika as techniques. Rav Uziel, you remember, is writing this before the founding of the State of Israel. So Hebrew is not standardized. He's referring to technology. Well, we would say technologia, we wouldn't say technika today. But he's talking about technology and science. With advancements in technology and science, certain religious concepts are going to shift as well. They're not all going to stay the same, says Rav Uziel. I mentioned on Shabbat, and I'm on camera, so I'm going to be much more careful than what I said on Shabbat. Electricity, and the attitude towards electricity on Shabbat and holidays. It hurts me a lot that we've discovered more about electricity. We have different forms of electricity, and you have not just what are the first kind of light bulbs called? Incandescent light bulbs. Then you went to fluorescent light bulbs. Now you're dealing with LED light bulbs. Are you going to tell me that in halakha those three things are considered the same? They wanted to prohibit incandescent light bulbs because they give off heat. So it's like a heat source. It's like a fire on Shabbat. My LED lights don't give off heat. So what does halakha have to say about that? No, it's all the same.
No, it isn't.
But that's not it. But find me the rabbi who's going to sit and talk to you about technological advancements in halakha. You already find Rabbi Masas permitting the use of electricity on holidays, not on Shabbat, but on holidays. What was his rationale for that? It wasn't accepted in the Jewish community, but his rationale was, you're not allowed to light a candle on holidays. You can't just light a candle. But you're allowed to light a candle from another candle that's already been lit.
Correct.
So he said, listen, on Shabbat, you can't turn on the light switch because that's lighting a candle. Fine, that's what he said. He said, but on Yom Tov, on a holiday, when I light the switch, what am I doing? I'm connecting the candle that's off to the electric circuit that is live. And that's lighting a candle from a flame that's already lit before the holiday.
Correct. My
And
husband
he allows this on Yom Tov.
Correct.
And he tells the rabbis who argue with him, stop speaking to me with emotions
Correct.
and argue with me using logic, either scientific knowledge or Torah knowledge.
Did the Moroccan community accept that?
They did, until they came to Israel, and they were bullied into accepting the other stance.
Correct.
And it was a normal. The chief rabbi of Egypt was not one of the more liberal rabbis of the Jewish community. Before the Jews of Egypt came to Israel in 1948, he led services on Shabbat with a microphone. He was very proud about it. His synagogue was one of the first synagogues that had a microphone with speakers. He was an elderly man. He couldn't sing for the whole synagogue. The tradition in that synagogue was to sing for the rabbi to lead the Musaf service. And so he had a special microphone installed into the bima for him to lead services with.
Wait, if the microphone you put it on before Shabbat,
It doesn't make a difference. Today they wouldn't.
Oh, okay.
But what you find is a rabbi who, he said, I researched microphones, I researched halakha, and I believe this is permitted. Now, it's okay for a rabbi to say, I disagree, and these are the reasons why I disagree. But this conversation must be had, says Rabbi Uziel. You can't just ignore this conversation. Because Jews don't use electricity on Shabbat. That's not a
You
truth.
know, it's the same like you put the chamin on the plata. You put the plata before Shabbat and it's on. So why the microphone doesn't work the same?
Okay.
That's why I thought it's
So
okay.
the simple
And
answer
it's the
is
same with the light.
you can't take the chamin just because the hot plate is on. You can't take the chamin as chumah. You can't take it on and put it on Shabbat morning.
No, you
It's on
You
beforehand.
put it in beforehand.
So the microphone being on before Shabbat is okay, but using it on Shabbat would be like putting the chamin on Shabbat. That's the problem.
Okay.
How?
I don't
I
understand
didn't understand
So,
that. I'm
If
sorry.
you want to have a class on microphones and electricity on Shabbat, I would love to have this class.
Oh,
but if
I'll
the
take my
lights
husband
are
because
on,
this is Richard's
you're using the
thing.
light
He
to
knows so
see.
much
Very
about
good.
it.
So
Richard
if you're
said to me
using the
on
lights to
Rabbi
see,
Don't get me wrong. There are people who didn't like this either. I have just 5 minutes. I want to finish reading this to you. It says, "En anachnu yicholim." His molidim dor dor shelot ubayot chadashot shedorshot bitonan. Every generation brings new questions in its wake that the rabbis must answer. אין אנחנו יכולים להעלים את עינינו משאלות אלו ולומר חדש אסור מן התורה. We can't close our eyes and say anything new is prohibited according to the Torah. He says that's not a Jewish approach. And then he says, ומכל שכן, but to the other hand, אין לנו הרשות להורות בו יותר משיקול דעתנו. We're not allowed to just say, oh, it's okay, because it's not mentioned, it's okay. We can't be lenient and we can't be strict. We have to deal with every issue head on. Who can deal with this issue? Who can change these halachot, so to speak? His students, Rabbi Uziel's students, Rabbi Chaim David Halevy, the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv Yafo, he gives the answer. And if you give me just 1 more minute, I'll read you his answer.
I'm going to hear
and
him
I'll,
speak this week. Do you know that?
Me?
I'm going to hear.
Oh,
I'm going to hear him speak. I
Who's
can't wait
No.
at JLI.
who?
The chief rabbi of.
Oh, Tel Aviv, yeah,
Oh,
it's not
yes.
the same one. This
Yeah.
this one is dead already. If you hear him speak, then I
got
know
a
a good
problem.
social worker for you to talk to.
When are you going, on Thursday?
Okay, on Tuesday morning. Yeah.
He says the following, Rabbi.
There's something unbelievable.
Oh, good.
He says, וטועה מאוד כל החושב שההלכה היא קפואה ונסתמה ימין ושמאל. Anyone who tells you the halakha is frozen and you cannot deviate right or left from halakha is gravely mistaken. אלא אדרבה, to the contrary. And you'll laugh because you don't feel this anymore, but this is what he really believed when he wrote this. אין גמישות כגמישותה של ההלכה. There is nothing more flexible than the flexibility of Jewish law. That's absolutely not the feeling that anybody has in the street today. But this is the feeling he had when he wrote this. שכן יכול מורה הוראה בישראל, because any teacher among the Jewish people has the permission לפסוק באותה שאלה עצמה, to answer the same question, ובאותה שעה עצמה, at the same time, לשני שואלים from 2 different people. So 2 different people are asking the same rabbi the same question at the same time. He can להטריף לאחד, he can tell one of them, sorry, that chicken is not kosher, ולהכשיר לאחר, and to tell the other one, no, that chicken is kosher. כי ידוע למורה הוראה באיסור והיתר והדברים מורגים, as you know, it could be that this lady doesn't have enough money to buy another chicken, and so you have to find a way to make that chicken kosher. But she has 3 other chickens that she slaughtered, and she could take the loss. Or this one, her mother-in-law is showing up for Friday night dinner. That's a halachic calculation, by the way. And her mother-in-law is going to make her life hell that she's not serving food on Friday night. And so we say, listen, you have what's called in halacha a pressing circumstance. Our rabbis transfer that as a mother-in-law coming to visit. That's a pressing situation. You have to save face. Yeah? ורק בזכות גמישותה של ההלכה, only in the merit of the flexibility of Jewish law, יכול היה עם ישראל בכוח חידושים רבים ומועילים שחידשו 15 דורותיהם. It's only due to these innovations in Jewish law that for thousands of years the Jewish people were able ללכת בדרך התורה והמצווה אלפי שנים. That we were able to follow Jewish law for thousands of years because we had rabbis who were not afraid to innovate and reapply Jewish law to new situations. ואם יעמוד להם חכמי דורנו אומץ ליבם, and if our sages of this generation only had the courage of heart, לחדש חידושי הלכה לאמיתה של תורה, to innovate true things in halacha, not for the sake of innovation, but for the sake of truth. And now this is the last point. Who has the right to innovate in halacha? Everybody can just innovate? Anybody can just change? What's the condition? Listen to the condition. בנאמנות מוחלטת לגופי ההלכה, with absolute and loyalty and faith to the laws, the principles of Jewish law. These are not people who don't like Jewish law and therefore they change it because it's not convenient. These are people who are absolutely loyal to Jewish law and they say Jewish law is different here because I have applied it differently. Not just written law, haktuva, vehamsoha, and both the written law and the oral law. I mean, there are things that the Shulchan Aruch might say are allowed, but I, as a sage sitting in this generation, know that if I would allow this to happen in this generation, it would be a disaster. And therefore, there's written principles and oral principles. But if a sage has the brave of heart to do things genuinely, not just because I want to change and I want to be progressive, and I want to because I believe that if Moshe Rabbeinu was here right now, this is the law that he would teach everyone. That's a terrible burden. This is a big responsibility, and it's not for everyone. But it's what our sages, that's why we had rabbis. Rabbis were not there to teach us what it says in the books. We can read the books for ourselves. The sages were here to help us apply what's written in the books to new situations that didn't exist beforehand. And just to say that everything new is not allowed, it doesn't take any talent, that doesn't take any knowledge. We're waiting for the people with the courage of heart, with the broad shoulders, and with the absolute loyalty to the sources of the Torah, to be able to come and say, it's not that it's a new age and it's a new Torah. It's a new age, but our Torah is not old. Our Torah is not outdated. Our Torah has what is relevant for today, and this is the philosophy that our sages were trying to bring out. This is what we spent the 10 days in Jerusalem studying. And B'ezrat Hashem, in the next weeks, I hope to sit down and study this kind of Torah with you. Everyone have a great day. I just want to hear what Paula has to say. But if you need to go...
So here's my little pet peeve. You know, you and Chabad use the same blue chumash. And in the notes, it's mostly Rashi. I'm sure he was a brilliant man. But he lived in the year 1050. Anyone else have anything brilliant to say since then? And if so, how come their notes are never in the Chumash?
Sit right here for 1 second.
Because the only notes I see in that blue Chumash every Saturday is Rashi. But mostly Rashi. Mostly
I want you to
Rashi.
look at the Chumash that I use. More correctly, my wife uses, but I borrow from her.
Yeah, but the Chumash you have in the synagogue that the ordinary Joe Schmo like me gets to see is only Rashi.
Do you understand?
Thank you. Look here. This is the Chumash. This is the two verses. All of these are commentaries.
Okay.
And so Rashi is this paragraph right here.
Okay.
All of this is hidden from the English speaker. This is in Aramaic, but the rest are in Hebrew. Some of them are being translated. For example, I have now Nachmanides. They have him on the Chumash.
So
also.
why not use a Chumash in our synagogue
Because
that has the English of other?
Because before we had the blue book, we were using this book. Open it for a minute.
Have you read?
Oh, I know Arya Kaplan.
But this just got old really quickly, so Art Scroll did a better job. It's not the best Chumash. Hopefully one day we'll have our own Chumash. But for right now, it's the...
Rabbi,
Yeah,
have you seen
Okay,
the
later.
God?
Thank you.
the brown one.